Following these same steps for solving multi-step equations, there are actually two other types of solutions you can get when you're solving them. So we have our standard one solution. When x equals a number, whatever the number might be, it could be 0, then I know that x has one solution. But there are two other possibilities. I can get infinite solutions, so I can get all real numbers, which means that doesn't matter what number I plug in for x is always going to equal x. So it'll make more sense once we look at it, but I can choose whatever number, and these two statements will always be equivalent. The opposite of that, we also can have no solution or no real numbers. That means that there is no number when plugged into this equation for x that will make this side equal to this side. So let's just follow our steps and see what that ends up looking like as we go through it. So step number 1 is to write down the equation and draw a line down the equal sign. Step 2 is to simplify the left side. So blocking my right side, I'm going to simplify the left. I can do the distributive property here. 4 times 6x gives me 24x. 4 times -4 gives me -16. I am left with one square and one circle. So there's nothing else that can be simplified. Step number 3 is to simplify the right side. I can do the distributive property. 8 times 3x is 24x. 8 times -2 is -16. That's one square and one circle. So I've simplified all the way. I can move on to step number 4. Now that I'm looking at both sides of the equation, you may realize, without even having to go further, that this statement is equal to this statement exactly. 24x minus 16 is equal to 24x minus 16. This is just a true statement. Doesn't matter what number I use for x, these will always equal each other because it's just the exact same thing on both sides. But just so we don't jump ahead, let's continue our steps to see what it would always look like in the end. So step number 4 is to add or subtract to make the variable terms, which is our squares, on only one side. So looking at this, I have 24x. So to get rid of 24x, I need to subtract 24x. What I do to one side, I need to do to the other. 24x minus 24x gives me 0x, so I can just bring down my -16. 24x minus 24x gives me 0x, so I can just bring down my -16, and that's just a circle. Now what I'm going to realize is that my -16 equals -16. That's just a true statement. So that's just a fact. We're not solving for anything. We're just being told something we already know. -16 equals -16. But just to keep going, if I'm going to subtract or add, so step number 5, to make the constant terms on the other side, I'm thinking, okay, how do I get rid of -16? I add 16. When I add 16, this ends up being 0. This ends up being 0. When you are given 0 equals 0, so just a fact that will always be true, in this circumstance, your answer is infinite solutions, or you might see all real numbers. They mean the exact same thing. So the problem at the beginning will look like a normal multi-step equation. We'll follow the same steps, but at the end, I'm going to just be left with 0 equals 0, which is always true. It's just a fact. If you go back to do the check step like we do in one solution, you can choose whichever number in the world you want. Doesn't matter what number I pick. If I replace x on both sides with that same number, these sides will be equal all the time. Example number 3 gives me my last type of answer. So we're going to follow our steps just like we have been. We're going to write down our equation. We're going to draw our line down the equation. We're going to go on to step number 2, and we're going to simplify the left side. I can do the distributive property. 15 times 2x gives me 30x. 15 times 2 gives me 30. There's nothing more that can be done on this side because I have 2 unalike terms, and so I cannot combine them. So I can move on to step number 3. Step number 3 is to simplify the right side. So I'm going to do the distributive property. I get 30x plus 40. I am left with 2 unalike terms, so I can't simplify any further. I've squared my variable terms and I've circled my constants. Now I can go on to step number 4. Step number 4 is to add or subtract to make the variable terms, which are our squares in this case, only on one side of the equation. I have a 30x over here, so I'm going to subtract 30x over here to get rid of it. What I do to one side, I need to also do to the other. Those cancel out. I bring down my 30. These actually cancel out too, so I'll just bring down my 40. That is nonsense. 30 does not equal 40. That is just not a true statement. We can keep going with the equation and we can say, okay, let's subtract 30 from this side so that, there's no constant over here. But then I'm just going to end up with 0 equals 10, which is still nonsense. When it gives us a number equals a number that is not the same number, that doesn't make any sense. So there is no solution. It doesn't matter what number I plug in for x, this expression will never be equivalent to this expression. So we call that type of answer no solution.